Okay.
Thank you so late in the day. I'm Ken Lucky. I'm really pleased to be speaking to you today. I have the pleasure of putting this together with Kevin Kim and David Gordon. We've been working hard to begin to develop some consensus around advising. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at the data behind the over-application avalanche that we are all experiencing and have been experiencing for the last 7 or 8 years. We're going to go over what the current advising that's available to students is. We're also going to look at what is sort of the no-brainers, the things most of us agreed on, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. And that's where we're going to be using the Poll Everywhere software to actually record your answers and be able to publish some of what our consensus in this room is on very specific advising topics. If you haven't already, please get on the Wi-Fi and then go and look right at the QR code or go directly to the website so you can get on Poll Everywhere now and be ready to go as we start the polling. So, we have a huge increase in applications in emergency medicine. This is ERAS data. This is starting in 2001 and going through 2017. What you see is through about 2010, we were very, very steady at around 300, 330 applications per program. A really pretty reasonable number for us to get through. And then abruptly in 2010, it just starts to skyrocket. All right, we have a massive increase in the number of applications. And it just keeps going up every year. We're nearing 3 times as many applications. We're up to almost 900 right now. So that is a lot more work for everyone who's going over the applications. And it can lead to us choosing to give interviews to students who maybe aren't the best fit for our program and not giving them to another student who would have been a great fit. And that's where the right advising comes in. Because what we want is to be able to get the right people at all of our programs every time. So let's look at what is going into that. What we see is that the number of applicants, right, hasn't changed tremendously, right? It's kept up with the number of additional spots we have in emergency medicine, both from expanding programs and new programs. But what has changed and what exactly mirrors the pattern of the increase in applications is the number of applications per applicant. They are exponentially going up too. And what you see is, again, right through 2010, it's very level. Most everyone, on average, applied to 25 programs. And then suddenly they take off. And again, they just keep going up, all right? We hit 30 at 2011. We hit almost 50 this year, 2017. Crazy number. That's average. How could be more above that? It's just really scary stuff. So why? I spent a lot of time looking at the NRMP data to try to sort of get my brain around what happened in 2010 or right before it. Why is there this freak out? So there are some actual things that have happened. And the first one is that we went in the mid-2000s from having about 100 people per year go unmatched to having 500 people go unmatched. And if you think about that as a dean, as an advisor, as a student, you've just gone to knowing 5 people versus 1 person who went unmatched. It frightens you. You immediately are going to be really worried that you are going to be the person that doesn't get matched. And an easy solution is to spend a whole bunch more money. You've already spent it on medical school at way more. I want to go to the specialty I want. I'll spend a little more money on my applications. The second, and this is just a theory, is we did actually have a little change. Millennials are who starts applying at this same time frame. And it may well be that for them, the risk of not getting a match is so frightening that the extra money and time and interviews is not much of a downside. Here's the graph when I made it that frightened me the most. Again, this is ERAS data. It's just the last 4 years. And what you see up at the top, that blue line, is U.S. medical grads. That green line is AOA, right? Our AOA students. And the red line is international medical grads. So what's really frightening about this is our AOA students were holding steady for another 2 years at 25, and then they went to 30, and then to 35. AOA, our best students, our most competitive athletes, are tremendously over-applying, and they're siphoning off the interviews from our mid-range students and our less competitive students. They're just taking them all. They actually over-apply compared to IMGs, right, who are considerably less competitive. So really frightening stuff. Where are we getting some of our advice? So they get it from deans, they get it from advisors, they get it from their friends, right? They get it from the core blog. They get it from Emma Hangouts, right? They get it from ADM. They get it from guides. And some shameless self-promotion, they get it from a blog that I do with one of my partners at Kellogg called PM Advisor. And all of these resources tell them they're over-applying, but it's not changing their behavior. All of these are also, unfortunately, really just expert opinion. It's a whole bunch of us who have spent time in CDEM and have gathered information and we've talked to other clerkship directors and program directors and decide what the right advice to give is. We don't have any data behind it. In 2012, CORE developed the Student Advising Task Force to try to begin to actually combat this over-application. And the way that we went about trying to change this behavior was to give better advice. We developed resources. Right? We developed an applying guide, frequently asked questions, online resource guide, and student planner. The way we did those were, again, expert opinion for the original authorship, and then sent it to the 50-plus members of our task force and got feedback and adjusted those. So they had some consensus. And those guidelines have all been endorsed by CDEM, by CORE, by AAM, and are being pushed out by all of those, plus EMRA. Having yet seen an event, right? Multiple years. This year, we're developing and drafting addenda for the special groups. Your international medical grads, your military applicants, your couples matches, and your ethics applicants. So, what are the no-brainers? What are the things I think everyone in this room is going to agree to? So, rotations, board scores, and red flags. Right? I think this is the stuff most of us can agree to. So, who here recommends a single rotation at the student's program alone? All right.
A single home rotation?
A single home rotation. One home rotation and nothing else. All right, your average applicant. Who recommends home and one away? Thorough. Excellent. Who recommends 14 rotations in emergency medicine? Excellent. We all agree home and away. Some of them are doing them, I swear. So, board scores. It's not the end all be all. We all agree, but we have good data behind who we give interviews to and who we don't give interviews to. We have concrete numbers that it's reasonable for students to have. And if there isn't much of an argument around that that's who we give them to, that doesn't mean it was how we made that decision. It's certainly not the total decision, but it's a part of it. And we can recognize when an applicant is going to have a problem. And we can then help that applicant to see how to address it in their application. All right, failures. All right, low step scores, time off, leaves from their medical school. So when we look at those board scores, and this is because it comes up really often, how do we come up with the numbers and the cutoffs? This is the NRMP data. All right, what it shows is, for a mean step 1 score of 210, we are very unlikely to give that applicant an interview. Low that score, not going to really get many interviews. When you hit 235 for your step 1 score, you're almost always going to get the interview. Those are the needs, that's the numbers, right? And even though we don't want students to focus so much on the board scores alone, it is an objective criteria they can look at. And it's a way that they can, without seeing, they can't see they're slow, they don't always know their rotation grade, it's at least a beginner for them to say, am I in the ballpark where I'm going to get interviewed, or am I not? It's survey time. And we think we've got all the equipment working. So, take out your phone, your laptop, whatever you're going to use.
We call it, right? So, survey time. We're going to start with a fun survey. Here's the info. You guys have this on your desks. We're going to have surveys open and close. We want to kind of keep an eye on the numbers, and when we think we've got enough numbers, I'm going to move forward, okay? So, the first survey is a very important one in my book. For those of us that live in the great state of Texas, it depends on where you live. In San Antonio, it's a soda. In East Texas, it's a Coke. So, in certain parts of Texas, like Waco, Scott Peters, where are you? It's Dr. Pepper, right? It's Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper was invented in Waco, Texas. Go figure. Okay. All right, so that was fun. All right, so our first real question here is, please tell me tell us what your position is. This survey should be showing up on your device. Give everybody a chance to kind of hop in there and let us know what you are. Looks like we're kind of hitting that.
Well, we are the CDEP trap.
Some stability. And I think this is really important because, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we're the ones who are trying to address this with our program directors. I'm glad to see that we have some program and core faculty here as well, so thank you very much. I'm going to go to advance the slide. We're going to close out this part of the poll. We've got a lot of stuff to do. So now what I want to do is we want to talk about competitiveness. And we try to create this idea that we have about 4 levels of competitiveness. That super competitive candidate, yeah, do me a favor, relax. You don't need to be in my office every hour. It's going to be okay. This is your residency to lose, right? That person who's got a 270, AOA, 17 pubs, served in the Peace Corps, speaks 4 languages, you know what I'm talking about. And they're worried about, am I going to get enough interviews? No, you'll be fine. All right, and then we've got that average candidate, probably 80% of what we see, what we're calling a competitive candidate. And then the ones that really give me a lot of heartache are those less competitive candidates. The ones who maybe have a 208 or a 212 step 1, and okay grades, and you know the kind of candidate I'm talking about. And then really the fourth tier is, yeah, dude, you failed step 1 twice. It's not going to happen. So the not competitive candidates. So let's get started. We're going to ask you about some different candidates. So we have a U.S. allopathic candidate, step 1 of 250, honors in all of her third-year rotations, honors in home EM rotation, no red flags. Tell me, is this a very competitive, or uncompetitive candidate?
You sure there's nothing wrong with her?
Understanding about personality. And if you want to, you can clear your responses and change it. Not competitive. Too smart. Smarter than me, so they can't come in. There we go. So, okay. So I think there's a pretty broad consensus. This is a candidate who's not going to have a lot of problems garnering interviews, and is likely successful to match. Anybody got any other input? You got 3 seconds. Okay. So now is our next candidate. This is a U.S. allopathic student. He got a step 1, 210, no honors, passed. Did fine, but passed everything, 210. And as far as we know, nothing wrong with that. Okay. Looks like we think this is probably a less competitive or a somewhat at-risk candidate. Some people think that this is somebody who may not be competitive at all, but somebody certainly who's straddling that borderline, we're a little worried about this person. Okay. Next. U.S. allopathic candidate, step 1, 230, honors in peds and family medicine, high pass in home EM rotation, no red flags. This is probably 70 or 80% of what I see at least. Probably somebody who is going to get in will get interviews, maybe not matching their first or second choice, but will eventually get a residency slot, it seems like. The bulk of the students think that. Okay. So now what we want to do is kind of start to dive into what factors we're considering when ranking competitiveness. So let's talk about step one. I know what I think about step one. The first, it seems so harsh, right? You sit down with this student, their host, I want to do the end. First question is, so what's your step one score? And then the student, I had one student, like, yeah, Dr. King, it wasn't very good. It was only a 241. Anyway, the point is I think that we all have it in our own minds what that step one score is and how we do our patients. So before you answer, let me just kind of tell you how we're doing this. What step one range makes for a very competitive candidate? What I'm asking you to do is tell me where the low end is cut off. So if you're 240, I want you to select E. If your score is 235, I want you to select D. Your low end for that very competitive look. Really, you're going to be fine kind of person. You're going to match. So a very competitive candidate, that person who we think walks on water. I'm sorry, who's a very competitive candidate. I want to be a little less. This is somebody who you're not worried about them matching at all. Period. I'm just going to point out we have somebody who, we have somebody who thinks, there we go, thank you. I just want to make sure there was no typo. I have clean data. Okay, so it seems like that 230, 240, 250 range is what we're talking about. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch it over. So now we're talking about that low end of the range where you think that candidate is competitive. Yeah, you're going to be fine. You're going to match. You're in the big bulk of, that 70, 80% people who are going to be fine. You're a competitive candidate. Where are those scores? Yes, ma'am.
Kevin, how do you want us to take into account context? I guess my rationale is if I have a 260 board score and straight pass bottom quartile of their class, I'm actually really worried about that person versus the hi, I'm honored that I have a 225 and a few extra strong portfolio.
In this particular case, what I'm interested in is how do you put step score only into this equation? I realize that this is highly contextual. The 260 who has been in front of promotion 53 times because they have professional issues is a high-risk candidate who's probably not going to match. I get that. But when we just do that triage look at a student and say, what's your step score? How do you stratify them? Is that helpful?
I think we consider no red flags.
No red flags. And this is a no red flag student. Okay. All right. So that seems like we're in that 220 to 230 range. Right. Now let's talk about that less competitive candidate. Where do you kind of floor out your less competitive candidates? Where perhaps these students, again, no red flags. You're like, yeah, I think you can match. You're going to have to work a little harder, and you probably need to have a fairly decent backup plan. You want to make sure that you're not unemployed in June or July. Okay, so it looks like we're looking at about 210 or so, maybe 200 for some people. Okay. Give you just a couple more seconds. All right. What do you tell a student who otherwise has no red flags, who has a step score of less than 200? Still a little bit of movement going on. Okay, good deal. Move on to our next area that we're going to talk about. Let's talk about, so most of the people in the room when we were doing the informal survey earlier, at least 2 rotations, home and away or 2 away or something like that, at least 2. I want to talk briefly about, do you ever or do we recommend a 3rd rotation? I have a lot of students, again, at 245, I think I need to do the 3rd rotation. I'm pretty much so, do you typically, as a regular routine part of your advising practice, recommend a 3rd rotation to your students, typically. That answers quite a big no. So a bit of movement going on. Give you guys a couple more seconds. Two choices, so they're pretty good. Let me change their mind. Okay, here we go. Do you ever recommend a third rotation? Ever. Not typically, ever. Now, as you guys work on this and you select your yes, no, the next slide is going to ask you why, if you do ever, not typically, but ever recommend a third rotation, why? It's going to be free text comments. Type in whatever you want. Some stuff we came up with, there are things like couples matching, poor performance on an away rotation, geographic preference, helping out with a otherwise weakish application like that 209. Hey, we really think you ought to have 3 solid slows. That might help you, something like that. But come up with whatever reasons you want. You can kind of abbreviate it some way. But I'm going to give you guys about a minute or 2 to type this in on the next slide. So just start typing, and you're going to see your responses line up here, all Twitter style. So there we go. And you can respond as many times as you want. So if you want to put in 3 different submissions, go for it. And we are trying to quantify this, so if you see a response that you agree with, just respond to it again. So for instance, if you think couples match is important, just type couples and we'll capture it.
This is going way faster than I thought it was going to, so are you willing to maybe facilitate a discussion? Yeah. Okay. I realize my microphone has been off this whole time.
Sorry about that. I thought my microphone was off, and then I guess I just turned it on so you guys could all hear me whispering. Okay. Is anybody still inputting stuff? This can lag a little bit. I don't want to keep everybody waiting for the system to catch up with us. You don't have to be shy. Just wave at me or nod your head or something if you're still doing input. We'll have an opportunity at the very end to put in comments. So if you think of other stuff, you can throw it in the comment section too, okay? I appreciate your input on this. We're going to go ahead and swap to the next one. Lastly, the famous how many applications do our students need to participate in, okay? And we're going to do this by very competitive, competitive, and less competitive. So how many applications should a very competitive candidate, I'm not quantifying very competitive, I think all of you have in your mind what very competitive looks like. How many should they put into ERIS? How many applications? Not interviews, applications. Pardon?
A lot less than 40.
Wow. We were just commenting that these results are far less than 40, right? That our deans are telling our students, you need to apply to 100 programs if you're AOA. You might get in. All right. I'm going to swap to the next one. How many applications should that competitive, that 70 or 80%, the bulk of our applicants, how many applications should they be putting in? Wow. So I thought here we would actually settle out to 40, but I'm wrong. We're settling out to 30. So after we're done, we're going to actually get through this polling quicker than I thought we were going to. We can discuss that and go back and discuss why. That's interesting. That's lower than I thought it would be. What do you think?
This is on ball where
I thought we were going to be.
It would be.
I thought we were going to be at 40, but I'm really excited to see 21 to 30 because that helps me out. Okay, last one. Ready? Here we go. That less competitive candidate, how many applications should they submit? Yeah. Not quite as much consensus here, but still, that's about where I thought it would land, somewhere north of 40. Interesting. Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question. Would anybody have answered this differently a year ago? This year changed. Am I the only one that feels like this year kind of was different?
So I'll just repeat the question. Informal poll, would anybody have answered these questions differently last year than this year? So a handful. 2 years?
Last year, but I'd say 2 years ago I certainly would have. I feel like, depending where you are, my guess is that 2 years ago this year is probably nothing changed.
And why do you ask the question? That would be my question to you.
I just feel like this year, personally, well, and I've actually heard anecdotally, that's why I'm curious, that some of those students who I felt like were competitive or, some kind of middle of the road, even though I would advise them not to apply to 50, they were, and they were barely getting 5 or 7 interviews.
Huh. Yes, ma'am.
I think,
Or Nick, you can talk too.
I mean, I think your frame of reference changes on what happens to you, because this year we had the exact example of your less competitive, the 210 no honors pass. We had one of those not matched. And so that affects how I'm thinking about these questions as opposed to the year before. We matched those people. So as soon as you have one of those not matched, it changes your whole calibration on these setting goals.
Yep. Other quick comments? Yes, Paul.
50 has to do with you're throwing a dart. If you actually went through a list, you could probably get rid of 30 of them. So that's
Yeah.
going through your list, you could probably do it.
Especially when, at least for my folks, are like, I'd really like to go to California. I'm like, no offense to anybody in California, love you guys. However, everybody wants to go to California, and you got 1 million people out there, and not as many programs as opposed to the East Coast. So I actually tell my students not to count California in their overall tally. So if they're applying to 30 programs and they want to go to California, they end up applying to 50. Anyway, yes.
I think this comment about that applicant may start to resonate with a bunch of us this year, because we certainly saw it when we were Michigan. Person who's third quartile their class, 220, 234 score, maybe some extras, they're going to be totally fine. And that was the group we actually more struggled more, not the lower tier group that we spent a lot of time advising and saying, how backup plan, and like 2, 3 of our students, 25 went to the backup plans this year, so we're glad that we had them. But, the lower tier group, we had them apply very strategically. We did exactly what was said over here. It was, there's no point you applying to California and Seattle and Boston, you're just not, because the numbers are against you.
Yeah.
So let's be strategic and find places where we think you're going to get well trained, but may not have your numbers maybe in favor of you. But I think this middle group is actually the one that we're starting to worry about, is what do you do with the middle of the class who doesn't stand out, who isn't just flash young people, that they're going to be fine.
Right. Okay, so what I want to do, I really want to come back to this, but I want to finish the polling out, and then we're going to have a discussion section that I will stay for as long as there are people in the room. I had a ton of coffee before I walked in here, so I'm good to go until about 10 o'clock tonight. I will stay here as long as you want to. I just want to get through the polling so people who want to leave can, and we have like 2 or 3 questions left, okay? And we will come back to this discussion point. How many interviews? I think the standard advice is 10. But the question is when you have that very competitive candidate, do they really need to do 10 to 12 interviews and spend on average, where are you? What we come up with, $6,000 for interviews?
I think part of the same problem is where are they? Where are there 7 to 10? If they want to stay in their town, just 4 to 6. If they want to go to California or somewhere else competitive or geographic, they might expand it.
again, what we're trying to do is, I know that there's a lot of different factors that weigh into this, but let's try and stick with just the general gist that you feel when you see this. So it seems that for very competitive, we're still recommending about 10 to 12. Okay. A little bit of shift here. I think one, yeah, I love the one. You know, I don't know what you guys call that. Sometimes we have our own students. We call that a suicide match.
Very competitive one. You don't need 10 to 12 to match. You might want 10 to 12 to know where you want to go.
Yeah, and this is actually a really good point. So how many to match? Not necessarily to get the optimal outcome, but how many to match? So give you guys about 30 seconds or a minute or so and see if that changes anybody's mind. Again, I guess I should have said this. Kind of my bias towards this is what I tell my students when I start is I say, my goal talking to you today is to make sure that you have a job in July. Because there is really nothing worse than going unmatched. Second worst is having to SOAP. Third worst is getting an EM program that you weren't as excited about as the first one on your list. Okay. So maybe a little bit of a shift. Okay, good deal. How about that competitive candidate? Again, to match. Not necessarily to get the optimal outcome. In my view, the optimal outcome is, hey, you're going to get to be an EM doctor. How many to match? A little bit more consensus here. Okay. Now how about that less competitive candidate? That candidate who has that low step score that we're a little worried about. How many interviews should they be doing? $13 plus, wow. Excuse me. Hold on for a second, what? You know, so I'll tell you a story. I have a third year student who matched who just matched. She's fourth year now, and she had a 209 step 1, a 213 step 2, passed everything. Good to above average slows. I would consider her a less competitive candidate. She had 16 interviews. Yeah. Precisely. What specialty? No, and she matched in EM. I think she put out about 70 or 80. She did, actually. She did have a backup plan because I told her, I said, you need a dual apply. So she did. Okay. Interesting. So it looks like we're advising our less competitive candidates to go out and do a little bit extra. All right, I'm going to pass this back over to Cian. That concludes the polling portion. At the very end here, we're going to have one more poll anywhere slide with just general comments. I'd appreciate it if you could type those in for us. And then we'll have a discussion that Dave will lead for us. But just sit tight on your poll anywhere software for right now.
So certainly we are really excited to have gotten all of this information and the polling data, as well as we saw a lot of consensus in this room of things that are considerably less than what it seems like the advising that students are getting or that they're listening to. And I think that's a big piece, and we're going to have a good amount of time for discussion, and we want to get to that. Going forward, we foresee that we would love to actually come up with some CORD and CDEM endorsed examples for the competitiveness, because I think that would be great for students to actually see, hey, this is the picture that fits me, and they're saying this is what I should do. I think that's one of the pieces that's hardest for students to do, is to say, which picture am I in? We very much need to add in the specifics that students need the most, and one of the biggest ones is going to be that application number. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're identifying if other factors are coming up, and we've already started saying some of them. If you're applying in California, if your goal firstly is to match, but how about that fit? How many do you have to go on to make that fit too? So there are other pieces that go into this. It's much more complicated than we could possibly be polling on to get the beginning of consensus, but I think that's where we can then develop and have more resources for students to help them out. So let's continue the discussion. I think
Did I give it a clicker?
I put it over here.
Put it over
Sorry.
here. We have to advance a slide to our next thing. So here is the promised. You got the slide.
Yeah, more self-promotion. We also have an application process task force that each of us are involved in, and we are having a discussion Saturday morning, 9 a.m., where we're talking about some of the solutions that we've come up with to try to improve the application process and hopefully reduce applications.
Can I put one more shameless plug?
Go for it.
So one poll we did not ask, did not want to get into, it's kind of cruel to ask the question with 3 minutes left, but with the new standardized video interview project.
Very purposely did not ask the question.
Yeah. So we're also learning about it self-included and who's going to know how it's going to affect the way we advise students. But during the core business meeting and during the CDEM town hall on Saturday, I just want to make sure you know that we will have representatives from the AAMC coming in to specifically start educating, giving us more information about this project. There'll be a lot more release of information on their website targeted for May 1st. We didn't embrace this in that context, but obviously we're in new territory this year for that as well. But take advantage of those meetings if you're still here.
And if you don't know what we're talking about when we talk about the standardized video interview, none of us do. So we'll get there together. Okay. So last one, just a general comment slide, and I'm going to open it up for general discussion. I think we only have one microphone, but so here's a comment slide.
And we'll walk about. Make it easy.
Interesting. Anybody? There it goes. Okay. So you guys can just throw your general comments up. Love to have a conversation again here as long as you want to be. But for the formal part of our presentation, we're done. So feel free to mill in and out and do your thing. I appreciate your participation and attendance, and we're going to move to the discussion right now.
Something you said earlier kind of struck me, and I was wondering if people are really having success advising students who are less competitive to not apply to like top tier programs, because I mean, not only do I feel like those conversations, they end up, well, I'm just going to apply to 100,000 programs anyway, so it doesn't matter, but there's also the very real fact that what we're all dealing with is that inconsistency. And I know we've had several students who would be less competitive, students who, for example, went from the Midwest to California for residency and didn't do an away there. And it's like, didn't expect you to get all those California interviews being like bottom 10% of the class. And I'm not sure if people have had success in that regard, because I haven't.
I'm going to say that I do, when I have a candidate who I think is less competitive, there's a couple things that go through my mind, and one of them is how energetic, how fabulous is this person in person? And when they are going to be a great interviewer, I really let them sort of let loose and apply to a ton of programs and see what interviews they get, because when they get the interview, people are going to forget all the rest. And when that person is maybe a little more timid and maybe isn't going to come across wonderfully in an interview, that's when I really work with them on targeted applications, applying to programs where I think they have a chance, rather than I'm applying to a huge bulk of programs that aren't going to look at their application.
Sarah,
I am advising a student who failed his first year of medical school after he I think he had 2 courses he failed, so he just retook the first year. I've never been in that situation before as an advisor, and I'm looking for advice for him. He's currently finishing off his first year, doing much better this time around. He seems clinically pretty strong. All of our students do an EMT program, and then they shadow us in the ED starting as first-year students. So I've worked with him. I think he's going to be a good resident. What advice can I give him to protect his application as much as possible? I've already told him he needs to really rock out step 1. And if anyone wants to throw out a score number that would make them feel comfortable at least inviting him to an interview in 3 years. 240? 240? Okay, so 240. I'll tell him 240. Does anybody else have any other advice for him? Yes, please. Okay. Okay, absolutely. Personal statement.
Is there a reason for it?
He said he just was not prepared for the level of academic performance required, and this time he's stepped it up and has done well. It wasn't like he had a illness or something else.
But he didn't struggle the second time.
No, he's doing well now. Take responsibility. Right.
more insight, please.
Okay.
Somebody will share.
So you want like his personal statement should basically be about this, essentially, and explaining taking responsibility and yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
He projects, like, if he's like, pass, high pass, honors and EM, that says a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Starting from the bottom.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Mary, do you want?
Thank you.
This is a comment more than a question. It's actually a question specifically to you, but being a program director, one of the less than 10% in the room that's a program director, but also being the primary advisor from all my students, I often question because I come to this a lot, are we all on the same page? Because as clerkship directors, it's very interesting to hear what our advisors are thinking as what makes the competitive candidate, but are you looking at what the program directors think is a competitive candidate? Because I struggled with that myself a little bit because I know for my own students, what may be competitive for me may not be competitive for everybody else and, out there because I know them better than most of you all do. So, are you going to address that portion of it too?
So not directly during this chord, but I think it makes sense for us to probably think about repeating something like this with a joint track so that more program directors could be in here.
And I would think that...
Does anyone
that's also
think
part
they
of the
can help me with that?
application for.
Sure.
Might be worth clarifying that a little bit because I've had a lot of us sitting over perplexed by that first question about what do you do? Because CD is what I call my prime title because I'm most proud of it, and I'm doing lots of screening and I'm the one inviting applicants. So I'd be interested in how many people in here, even though they're in that 90%, they're also
right.
involved in
Because
the
I'm not the clerkship director, but I'm the advisor of every medical student that goes into EM in my program.
How many folks here that call themselves clerkship directors are also on the whatever committee you call it that invites people in and interviews them and selects them?
Yeah.
Everybody. Yeah.
So close to half.
Any other comments, questions? I'm fully caffeinated. We can do this.
Actually, one comment. I know this is for tomorrow, but I think the SLOE is a big part of this equation that, we're not specifically talking about. We'll talk about tomorrow, but what do you do with the bottom 1/3 students? And that's a big factor as well.
I just wanted to say I've been keeping an eye on a lot of these comments here. A lot of great things are popping up here that we're actually going to be addressing as the late-breaking topics for the Application Process Improvement Task Force on Saturday morning. So definitely come out to that if you are some of the people that are putting these comments up.
Any other comments or questions? And I think really the focus that we have here is Sienna and I just trying to get a starting point to at least initiate a conversation. So while we know this is not going to be the end-all and be-all, I really appreciate you participating today. Thank you. And we have some more comments here. Hang on.
And staying so late.
Yeah, so just some people who are, well, I guess I have two questions. But as far as the people who are less competitive, would be interested in kind of hearing from the people in the room how aggressive you are about pushing these people towards back doors to emergency medicine, like family medicine with an EM fellowship, or routes like that.
Is part of your question what your threshold is? Like, at what point do you say emergency medicine not for you outside the board score?
A threshold would be a great. Does anybody have a threshold? It's kind of subjective, I think, but do people aggressively push that, or do you say, well, no, because they come to you and if you give them that suggestion, they're emergency medicine all the way, and I have students say, no way, I'm EM, I want to do EM. I know you do, but you're not doing it this way.
I think just from my perspective, it varies depending on the candidate because I've had candidates that I've said to them, you're not going to get in. I'm sorry. It's just, I'm like, you can still apply, but you've got to have a backup plan. And they've done it, and they haven't gotten in, and they've had the backup plan, and they've been great with it because, yay, I got the backup plan. And then I've had others that have just said, hardcore, no, I'm not doing it, and then not matched and gone.
I should have listened. So
I think developing backup plans for that less competitive applicant is really important, and talking to them just that of the reason to have a backup plan. It doesn't mean that you're giving up on EM. We know that you love it and that you want to be it, and it's not that there isn't a chance, but really discussing with them how much it means to have gone through that thought process of what's my other way, either into something else I'll be happy in. And sometimes that takes, some time on our part, so spending time with students and asking them what they enjoy, why they enjoy it, so that you can help see if there's another area in medicine that you can steer them towards. And then the second is, if EM is just the only place it's going to be, well, let's talk about other ways to get into EM.
So that was going to be the second part to my question is, are there other creative ways that you advise people to get to emergency medicine eventually? Because my number one thing I would tell them is, look, go family medicine, and we need enough docs in emergency medicine. You might not practice in a major trauma center somewhere, but we need docs, and you can practice emergency medicine. You may have to do it through family. Are there other creative ways that you advise your students?
I'll tell you what I've started doing is I have a lot of students who, the less competitive ones, are like, well, I'll apply for a prelim, and then I'll try EM the second time around. But when we look at the NRMP data, we know that it's about 2 times less likely that they're going to match as a prelim than they are at their first time around. So I've actually started advising my students, look, I get it, you want to do emergency medicine, and okay, you've got a 201 on step 1 and you scrape by on step 2, and you're not a very strong candidate. So yeah, you can apply to EM. You're not likely to match. I strongly recommend you do family medicine because you can practice as an emergency medicine doctor in rural areas. But I try and steer away from trying to backdoor them into an EM residency. I try and tell them, look, it's problematic. I just had an international student who had a 197 on step 1. I'm like, dude, it's not happening. You're an international grad with a 197. You're not getting an EM. You need to do family medicine. Well, I really want to do an EM residency. I said, well, maybe after you practice family medicine for a few years, you can segue into an EM residency if you really want to, as a second residency program. But I stopped trying to give people that I want to do a prelim. No, don't do a prelim. Do family medicine, do internal medicine, practice emergency medicine in a less busy place.
And for some applicants, and this is where spending some time and talking to the applicant about what they really enjoyed, PD is easier to get into, and then doing an EM fellowship out of PD is one of the things that I've had applicants that weren't going to match an EM end up going to and being very successful with.
So I don't know if everybody knows this because I just had to look into it because somebody asked, so I'll just clarify. So remember that EM fellowship through family med and those types of things doesn't get you the ability to be boarded. That's one of the, because I have like my family med colleagues saying really seriously under this conception that they can become boarded within EM for us. It's a 1-year certificate that can be done, and almost nobody who's finished their residency in family med wants to do a free 1 year as a fellowship and just moonlight. They want to get out and make money. So if you truly have someone who's thinking of splitting, then there's only 2 programs right now for the FM EM one. There's a few more EM IM ones for the rural track. People are truly dedicated and want to kind of split the difference where they work in an EM and also admit in a rural area, and they're a hospitalist as well. But just to clarify when you're advising, because I think a lot of the students, when you look on the boards, also somehow think that there's this EM fellowship floating around out there that they can magically do after doing this residency and get boarded.
Because you just mentioned it, I do want to say I am the program director for one of the 2 EM FM programs in this country, and it is no less competitive than the straight EM program. So,
No less.
And
the
just
deciding factor in that combination, FM, EM, IM, EM, PPM is really the EM component, right?
So I was going to say, so I'm glad you said that, because BT Dubs, the family med to the EM fellowship it's very competitive. I used to work with a lot of our international U.S. citizen international medical grads, and that's just not a pathway really to hyper consider anymore. Second of all, don't forget, and please don't, I really hope I don't offend anyone right now. Don't forget EM-IM programs. I have profound respect for my IM colleagues, but they get less applicants. They just do. They're not competitive, but I have had some success with some of my mid to lower range candidates actually going to better programs and IM programs if they're willing to do the time. And then finally, and maybe this is just my ASAP counselor bias, but I don't know how long our FP then EM trained candidates are really even gonna be able to practice emergency medicine in this country. I mean, there is a constant move, and if you look at the data, it's on a constant decrease. So, just as an aside.
Going back to the point about people trying to backdoor in, one of the things that I'll always put into my advice is, if you're going to try a transitional year, or if you're going to try an internship and trade, you have to go to a place that has an EM program so that you can impress that program director and win them, because on the open market, it's not very good. But if one guy knows you, you got a much better chance. And also, just out of respect for other specialties, I'll tell them, if you're going to try and go internal medicine and then switch, if you're going to try and go surgery and then switch, you have to be open and honest with your program director from day one, or they'll kill you.
Any other comments, questions?
You want to sing? Is that your cell phone? Yeah. All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much.